Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name is Jeff Thomas, and we have a very special guest with us today. His name is Mike Towers. He is the owner of GSM Industrial, which is a steel fab and mechanical contracting business. He's going to tell us all about that. Welcome to the program, Mike.
Well, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, Mike, we always try to start with just kind of the backstory. Where did you grow up? What was your family like? Was faith a part of your upbringing? Was there any entrepreneurial stuff? Obviously, we know that you took this business over. It's a family business, but I'm picturing you in the steel mill somewhere. Who knows, running around. What was it like growing up?
Yeah, so I was probably a little different as a kid than a lot of the folks that you have on the program. I was not very entrepreneurial. As a kid, I had some anxiety. I remember a report card that said I was really bad at following directions. I was kind of an awkward kid. At some point in middle school, I got a really bad case of acne on my back. This is a little embarrassing, but it was so bad that my parents had to take me into a dermatologist, and they prescribed some medication in a heavy dose, and it paralyzed my legs for a period of time.
Wow.
And they backed the dosage off, and it kind of put me in a fog. So all this to say, I always felt a little bit like I was on the outside looking in. I always felt a little bit different as a kid. I did grow up in a Christian household. Parents were believers. Was involved in a church. Didn't get a lot at the time out of sermons and things as a kid, but we did have a really cool student ministry program. Did a lot of outdoor activities, got into backpacking, and kind of began developing the beginnings of a faith. Really found that I could connect with the Lord outdoors and in nature. So that's kind of how things got started for me. Didn't have the proverbial lemonade stand and dreams of being a businessman.
Yeah. Were the health problems, stuff like that? Was that middle school? How old? High school? How old?
Yeah, that was middle school.
Oh,
and
brutal.
And the reason I mention it is it was just kind of like par for the course for me as a kid. Like I just felt like I was always stumbling into one thing or another and not really connecting well with others, or learning how to be part of the in group. So I didn't tell the funniest part of that is we go into the dermatologist, and they look at my back, and they break out a camera. So this was before you had a camera on your cell phone. And they start taking all these pictures of my back, and so I'm sure I'm like in some medical book somewhere. Because of how awful a case of this.
Well, and they had to take them down to the the CVS to get them, or Walgreens to get them developed or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
A 24-hour photo back in the day.
That's right.
Well, any siblings?
So I have an older sister, about 4 years older than me, and a younger brother. I was pretty close with my brother growing up. We, two brothers, always going fishing in the creek and finding things to do, inventing games and those kind of things.
And you were were you in Lancaster, PA growing up? Where were you?
Yep, I'm a Warwick alumni. Grew up in Rothsville area, actually closer to Ephrata than Lititz.
And so I know we're going to get into the family business later, but were you put to work in the family biz, or what did you do, like high school and stuff like that, summers?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of that. I think probably my first real job was at a Christmas tree farm in Brickerville. And so I was kind of short stint over the Christmas season. But I was not officially employed. I might have been officially employed over the summer or two in high school, but when I was younger, went and pulled weeds at my dad's office, and in high school in the summers, I would go and scrape rust off a steel had been sitting outside so it could be painted, and all the odds and ends jobs that nobody else really
Very
wanted.
glamorous.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, when I got through high school, I was not real interested in the family business, and in fact, I actually remember a conversation with my parents, and I don't know if they were trying to ask me what I wanted to do with my life or what the context was, but I remember telling my dad that I'm not much like him, and it wasn't intended to be, offensive in any way or anything, but I can remember that there was some emotion there. I feel like that was maybe a little bit heartbreaking. And the reality is I'm very much like my dad, but as most kids, you don't know that. You don't realize,
Right.
and so I was not interested in doing what he did. I went to college. I really enjoyed some architectural classes I had in high school, and went to study architecture and design. Actually switched over to industrial design after my freshman year of college. And actually in college, you asked about faith a little bit. I had kind of developed a rudimentary faith as a kid, and
Right.
in college, as many people do, I really kind of walked away from that to decide who I really want to be. And it was kind of an interesting time of then realizing the hypocrite that was inside of myself as I was still doing like campus ministry stuff, because I was familiar with that,
Yeah.
but I wasn't living that life. And so I really wrestled with God through that time, and went and worked at a summer camp as a Christian camp counselor of all things, and that's really where the Lord changed my life a lot.
Yeah, when you really have to teach it 24/7 and disciple
Yeah.
even other kids, was
Yeah.
that kind of it sounds like that was transformational.
Yeah, that was part of it. I think God sometimes uses physical things, at least in my life. And here I was in Maine, away from my family, and I started having a real issue with what I thought was an issue with my leg. I was having all this hamstring pain. Turned out I had a bulging disc, so sciatic nerve pain.
Yeah.
It was really debilitating. So I'm up there trying to, minister to people, but yet my faith isn't where it needs to be, and I'm kind of physically broken down. And the Lord really used that time to minister to me through other folks that were there. It was neat.
Wow. Okay, and so you go to college, you get this industrial design. We were talking before we started recording that I've got a daughter studying industrial design, so I know a little about that world, and it doesn't surprise me that you came maybe through architecture to get there, because what I realized with all of her classmates, having gotten to know that world a little bit, is that they're like artists who are engineers.
Yeah.
So for those of you listening, we have a YouTube channel, so you have to go to YouTube and look at the painting behind Mike. I haven't asked you this question. Did you paint that?
No, I did not paint that.
I bet you could. I bet you could.
I don't know about that, but I did. My senior thesis project was really cool. I designed a guitar that rotated to relieve stress on the wrist to reduce carpal tunnel syndrome.
Oh, that's cool.
It was a really fun project. It was neat. Industrial design, for those of you that don't know, it sounds more industrial, and it can be, but it's really product design is the I think way to put it.
Exactly. And what just because I'm just going to nerd out on this a little bit, just because I'm tangentially in this world right now, but do you kind of like, it seems like people like my daughter really likes the early kind of research and prototyping, and then some people kind of like the maybe prototyping on the manufacturing piece. What part of that process did you sort of enjoy most?
Boy, I had never taken an art class before I went, and it is very art intense type of program. So I learned how to draw and
Yeah.
learned it. My kids look at old stuff I did when I was in college, like, Dad, you're so good at art. I'm like, yeah, I'm not really, especially compared to other people that I was
Right.
in
Right.
with. But I really like the prototyping
Yeah.
side. I'm a hands-on,
Okay.
build it, make it, yeah.
Okay. So now I also realize that industrial design is not like maybe electrical engineering, sometimes mechanical engineering, where it's a little nichier,
Yeah.
and so what was your first job out of college with that degree?
So interestingly, well, I came out of college. I really enjoyed it, but I also decided I really didn't want to do it. I
Yeah.
didn't want to make more stuff in a world full of stuff. The jobs that were most prominent were mostly in big cities. I
Yeah.
wasn't sure I was a city guy. Now, I probably had all kinds of wrong notions about this. I did do some industrial design work after college, contracting with Lancaster General Hospital for some display stuff, and then worked a little bit with a display company in Lancaster. But it wasn't, I wasn't feeling the purpose in it. And I was
Yeah.
really at a time where I was looking for purpose. So I actually left that to do student ministry for a little while. And that was interesting time, and I was totally outside my calling. And so the Lord used it, and it was definitely a time that I grew a lot, but also not what I wanted to do with my life and what I felt I should be doing. So that brings me full circle to the family business, which I never intended to be involved in. But I hit a point where I'm like, well, I just need to do something to figure out what I really want to do with my life. And so I started working at GSM, really intending it to be temporary. And in a sense it was, and in a sense it wasn't. But I worked out in the field, kind of real blue collar work. Really didn't enjoy getting up that early in the morning and what we did, but it was super important for me to get that kind of experience and work with the folks that are out there on customer sites, installing what we fabricated and doing the mechanical contracting side. So that was really an important time. And I came into the office and I really latched on to some of the systems and processes side. So we were a small business that had been growing. My dad was excellent at giving people ownership over what they were doing, gave people a lot of autonomy, a lot of freedom, promoted them into a role and let them run with it. So there was a lot of energy in the organization, and a lot of people really succeeding in what they were doing, but not a lot of, it was a lot of silo mentality. I'm going to do this, you do this, and a lot of miscommunication throughout the organization. So I spent a lot of time kind of developing that kind of how do we do things better part of it. And I enjoyed that. I also wasn't directly in the line of business. I wasn't directly in operations. I wasn't directly overseeing folks. I wasn't even directly being overseen in a way that was helping me grow and figure out what I wanted to do. I kind of was bumping my head against the mentality of some of the longtime leaders who were there doing an excellent job, but didn't necessarily want this kid to come in and change things around.
Right.
Um, and so, I kind of through all that was hitting my midlife crisis in my mid to late 20s, and realizing once again, I don't think this is where I'm supposed to be. And so that brought me to a point in 2009, sitting down in my dad's office and telling him, amidst the economic recession, that I was going to take off and I didn't intend to come back to GSM.
Wow. So where did you go?
Yeah, that was a fun time. I went and flipped a house for 8 months. I just bought a house, 3-bedroom place that was a dump, and did everything myself, fixed it all up. Was planning to flip it, sell it. The recession had not hit the bottom the way I thought maybe it had, so my timing didn't work out great. Had some other complications. I was working on the front porch one day, and a police officer showed up in front of the house and walked up and said, "What's going on?" I said, "Well, I'm obligated to tell you that a registered sex offender moved in next door." And so I thought, oh boy, right when I'm about ready to sell this place, that's interesting.
That's gonna be great for marketing.
Exactly. So I put it on the market, and it was a perfect place for young families, and every young family that came in to look at it, I told them the information. And I actually got to know the guy a little bit, and I really think his life was going in the right direction.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a complication I didn't expect. So
what was next? How long did you spend separated from the family
business? I was
business?
there about 8 months, and figured out what I was going to do with that property. And then I actually took a job at a software company, SolidWorks reseller. If anybody's familiar with SolidWorks 3D design program. So I was an applications engineer. I had kind of had a background in that through my studies and work in industrial design. And it was a lot of fun. I really I loved the software. I liked working with people to learn how to use it. So I did that, varying aspects of software world for about 4 years before an opportunity opened up to go back to GSM, which I was not expecting to do.
How did that happen? How did that opportunity present itself?
Well, I think one thing I've learned, in my life, it was really important to be away from the business, to get a foundation there, and learn it, and then be away from it. And I didn't do it knowing that was the wise thing to do or anything like that. It just is kind of the path I took. But being away, I had a pretty successful position. I could have kept going in the direction I was going. But it opened my eyes. I was actually in a lot of other companies through that position, working with people, seeing how other companies operated. And it kind of opened my eyes up to what GSM had to offer, and some ways that I maybe could fit in there, and ways that there might be a future there for me. So then what happened is GSM was in the process of getting a contract for more production work. We're very much custom job shop, custom steel fabricator. We don't have a product, but in this case, it opened up an opportunity to do some more production work that would be more repeat type of work. That would be a nice add to the mix of what we do. And so I went on board to kind of help start that effort. And it was probably a little more in line with some of my experience in gifting. So it offered an opportunity to get my foot back in the door. And what was neat is, my dad didn't sit down and hire me back. It was actually two of the senior guys that, that I was feeling like I was bumping up against when I was there.
Oh,
before.
Really?
And they, we sat down and talked through it, and they felt like I was the right fit for that. And so that was really encouraging.
Well, that's kind of a nice full circle.
Yeah.
People that you felt a little maybe estranged from that kind of came back around and hired you. That's cool. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Are either, you have a sister and a brother, right? Are either one of them in the business or no?
They're not. My sister has a career. She actually originally studied industrial engineering, and worked overseas for a while, and she's in speech therapy. She's never been in the business. My brother came into the business for a while. We overlapped a little bit. And I left and then came back, and then he left, and now he's got a career both in our church in ministry as a ministry director, but and in addition to that, that's kind of a part-time position. He's also really gone down a real estate road and doing really a lot of work in the real estate world.
So you've been back, if my math is correct, 11 years or so. back in the family business. Is that about right?
About right. Yep. Yep.
And so what does that road look like?
Um, so it's been really good. The first thing I would say is when I was away, my dad began the process of retiring, and I wasn't intending to be back. And so he promoted from within a gentleman who is still our president. So Brian Dumbach became into the president role. So he and I work very closely together, and it's really a blessing to me. Early in those years, I felt the pressure of like, okay, if I'm going to be in the family business that my dad started, and I have to be the president, and we are planning that in the future. But it's been a real blessing not to rush that leadership process. So it's been really cool to kind of grow up through. I've held almost every position you can think of throughout in the organization. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but I've been able to do a lot of different things and not rush through that, and work closely with Brian. So I when I came back to GSM, I began holding some more positions that were more in the direct influence of the organization. Managed a division of the company that we had. Got into some of the finance and admin side and a VP role there. And now I'm the executive vice president, and primarily I oversee the operations, as well as wear a few other hats. So it's been a cool process to be able to go through that slowly, develop relationships with people, and learn a lot of different aspects of the business.
It's always tricky. Is your dad involved at all, or is he totally out now?
He's out. Yep.
Okay. And was he there even temporarily when you came back, or
Yeah.
did you overlap for a while?
A little bit. Yep. Yeah. He was kind of transitioning out at that point.
And then, of course, I'm in the wealth management business, so I always think numbers and structure. So, help us with. I know there's some people listening to this who are dealing with the same thing you've dealt with. There's kind of two or three interesting pieces to this puzzle, right? I mean, there's the role you play with a professional manager, if you will, okay, and how you navigate that. So you've kind of talked a little about that. Do you have kind of a game plan to advance? Is Brian older than you, for example, or what does that path professionally look like for you think?
Yeah, so he's 15 years older than I am, and starting to look at retirement himself. So we're beginning to work through that transition.
That's a pretty good spread, and so it doesn't sound like there's much conflict there. And then a second question, of course, is really around your siblings and ownership. So as ownership gets passed, whatever you're comfortable sharing about how that kind of works, that can be difficult when you have two siblings that are not in the business and you are, and maybe this is the big family asset. What can you tell us about that process?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is one that's done differently.
Very differently. It's hard too. Almost always hard.
Yep. Yeah. So we in our company, you have to be directly involved in the business to own stock in the business, which I think has been healthy for us. And at this point, we're fully family held. I own the company with two cousins who run the GSM Roofing, which is our sister company. And so you do have to be, fully in the business to own stock, which was interesting when I decided to leave. I was forfeiting my stock. One of the lessons I learned through that was kind of interesting. I talked about that time of flipping that house, and that was kind of a seeking direction time in my life. And when I left GSM, prior to doing that, my stock went back to the company.
Right.
Between that and year end stuff, I got a little bit of money that I wasn't expecting.
Right.
And when I went and flipped this house, I was kind of wrestling through what was God doing in my life. And my wife said, I think we should adopt a child.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was something we had kind of maybe talked a little bit about in the past. We didn't have any kids yet. We hadn't been trying to have kids. And so I had to really wrestle through that. But it was neat that the Lord provided that
Mm,
money and made it clear that how I could use that to start a family in a non-traditional way. And I really see that as like a first fruits. And I think that applies to our lives in general, not just in business, but also in business, that, that mentality can be, oh, I got something I wasn't expecting. Let me tuck this away or let me spend it on
right.
something I want. And it was neat to go through the process of what should I be doing here. And the Lord was working on my heart and my wife's heart. And that whole first fruits mentality was something I learned there. And boy, are we blessed by we've got two adopted girls and a biological son, and just love my family. Happy to talk to anybody who's ever thinking about adoption, and looking for guidance there.
So I want to put a pin in that and come back to that. And I want to get on this kind of how you think about, kind of your giving back. But in terms of the business, do you mind sharing? Is it kind of a gifted shares, or are you buying the stock from your dad, for
Both.
example? What does that look like?
Some of both. So my dad was very generous in doing some gifting, and then also I purchased my brother's stocks when he left the business, and purchased some of my dad's stock.
Got it. Okay, so that clarifies that. And so let's get back to this kind of so adoption has been a big part of you and your wife's world. I mean, that's a ministry to itself, frankly.
Yeah,
What are the other things? How do you think about, maybe in your personal life, if you will, and even maybe through the business? How do you think about other things that you consider kind of your ministry?
yeah. I guess I've kind of have a number of things that I've sort of developed as a mentalities of business principles, that some of it applies to business, some of it applies to personal life, some of it applies to both. Um, one of the big things that I think the Lord taught me through some of this stuff I'm sharing is, much like those of us who have faith in Christ know that our finances aren't our own.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes we don't translate that, and I've been guilty of this, of not translating that over to the business side of things. And we tend to hold tightly to our role, to our company, to our identity in that. And I think, I've come to realize that while the business is mine, it is not my own. And we have a lot of control and influence. I have a lot of control and influence over what I do, decisions that we make, what type of work we go after, how we organize our people. But there's a lot of things I can't control, and just having that mentality of, Lord, this is not mine, this is yours, and that I'm an instrument in that. I think there's a lot of freedom in that.
Yeah.
It takes some pressure off in how we think about ourselves as business owners or business leaders. So that's one
Yeah.
thing.
I wrote down as you were talking about the control piece. I mean, that's the stewardship responsibility, right? So I like this sort of steward, not owner mentality. That's one of our 12 principles at Arcos, the company we've got here. And
Yeah.
it's an important mentality. And what we've noticed is, of course, we deal with, generous business owners for a living. There's definitely a correlation between their success as a business and kind of how loosely they hold it, kind of to
Yeah.
your point. Because I think about, like, if you're gripping something so hard, you know, it's that's just not the healthiest way to manage any of the business. And so, like, that mentality of, hey, it's God's, he can do what he wants with it. I'm just trying to wake up and take instructions and do what I can control. But so when things go, inevitably you have challenges.
Yep.
It's not like, well, I must have caused those. Well, I mean, it's just part of the, okay, God wants us to have a challenge. All right, how does he want us to deal with it? I don't know. There's just something about I like that language of the freedom
Hmm.
of holding it more loosely. Maybe you
Yeah.
can talk a little more about that. What's an example maybe of a challenge that you had that you're like, okay, well, how are we going to get through this? You know?
Well, I'll give a people
Yeah, there you
example.
go.
That's one of the other things, I think is really important is, business is about the people. It's not about the product. And, the same principle applies to managing people in my experience,
Yes.
um, holding on loosely. And so, we want to value people. We work really hard to value people, to give them opportunities in the organization, to pay them well, to pay them fairly, and then also to give them opportunities to advance, even if that means we might be setting them up to go somewhere else. And
Oh,
I think
such a good word, man.
sometimes we can hold tightly to, I want to bring them along, but if I do this,
What
they
if
could
I
get
train them too well?
right,
They're going to
right,
leave me.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can get some inner turmoil there.
That is such a great point, man, because it's like you want to control them too, which is,
yeah,
of course, absurd.
of course,
We don't want
yeah,
to be controlled by any other human.
yeah, yeah.
So,
So I had a young guy that came up, was a welder and came into the office and was really doing really well. And
right,
he left and went to a competitor, and I had people in the organization saying, "Man, you got to get him back. He's like
right.
future of this company. Like we need him." And like I totally agree, but I can't make him do anything.
Oh,
Turns out, he needed to have his experience doing something else, and he ended up coming back to us. And that
oh, he
having
did?
having been away, I think was huge for him and for what he's doing. So sometimes you cultivate people and they leave for good. And sometimes you cultivate people, they leave, gain some more experience, come back. But either way, I think it's important to be doing what's best for people. And ultimately, I really believe if you're doing what's best for your people, it's really going to be best for your business, even if it means you lose somebody every now and
Such,
then.
man, that is such a great point. You know what just hit me as you were telling that story? It's actually a really cool story. Uh, do you think your dad felt that way when you left the first time?
Hmm, it's a great question. You have to ask him that.
Right? That's a good dinner question for your dad. Like, hey, I
you
just
know,
told my buddy Jeff this story about this guy coming back. He asked me.
I'm gonna have to
You
ask him
gotta
that.
ask him. You gotta tell me
I
later
think
if he felt. He's probably gonna laugh when you ask him that question.
right, right.
I have a
You know,
feeling he felt the same way.
I don't know if he thought if he was thinking, oh, maybe he'll go gain experience and it'll be even better for him when he comes back, or if he
But
comes,
but he, but I don't
but
think he could think that way.
no,
My guess, this would be great to find out, but my guess is he was releasing you. Like, hey, he wants to
yeah,
go do his own thing. Probably hurts my feelings a little bit, but let him do his own thing. I guarantee you, he was
you
talking to your
know,
mom about that. And anyway, you ought to close the loop on that. That'd be fun.
to his credit, he never put pressure on any of us as kids to
That's
go into
amazing.
business. He kind of he left it open enough that we knew it was an opportunity, but never felt any pressure. And then even when I left, I didn't feel, I think I felt some disappointment on his side, but I didn't feel pressure.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
I think.
pretty. What do you attribute that to? What about his personality do you attribute that to? What's your dad like?
Oh man. So super cares about the people around him. Isn't going to be the first to go telling you, a big sob story about how much he loves you, but he shows it in the way that he treats people. And he treats everybody, he's always treated everybody. Our culture in our company is still, even though he's been out of the organization now for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or whatever, um, our culture is definitely very much founded on the autonomy, and he empowered people, and he never squashed people, into, hey, you've got to do this because this is what I need out of you. It's, giving people opportunities. In fact, that's our mission. When we sat down to figure out what is our mission at GSM, and he was still in the room at this point, it wasn't about fabricating steel or doing mechanical contracting. It's about creating opportunities for people in the organization. So yeah, that really is at the root of who he is.
Well, that was going to be my next question: is how do you think about, this is obviously the Generous Business Owner podcast, and like we talked about before we started recording, that takes many forms, right? Time, talent, treasure, inside the business, outside the business, to the people. So I'm catching this people-centric approach. So if we sort of combine that sort of mission statement and this empowering people, maybe how does that look, or how would you discuss kind of the giving of your time, talent, and treasure inside and maybe outside the business?
Yeah. I think you have to have a mentality of business being a high calling. Kind of like we look at our pastors in our churches and say, man, what a high calling. In business, we sort of have a congregation, but instead of getting up there and preaching to them, they are constantly looking at us, and what they want to see is, do we care about them? And I'm sure that gets harder and harder as a business gets bigger and bigger. I've got about 115, 120 people to know their names and have varying levels of relationship with. But I think that's what people are looking for. My dad used to go out on the shop floor every day. I think it was twice a day, walk through, keep a pulse on what's going on out there. But it also, and I've continued that tradition. What I find is sometimes I do a big loop and wave people, say hi, go right back into my office, get some work done. Other times I'm out there for a while because I keep getting hit up. Hey, I wanted to ask you about this.
Right.
What do you think about this? Who do I go to talk to about this? And just for people to be able to know that the people that are running the organization are willing to, want to know them, want to hear what their needs are. I think that's really important.
I think that's so important, man. I was just doing an interview with somebody else who was interviewing me, and they were talking about we were talking about that concept of my dad was a business guy who became a pastor, and so I really had that backwards in my 20s, where I was like, I guess the people doing the heavy lifting in ministry. Remember, people still to this day use the term called to ministry, and that means you're a missionary or a pastor, essentially, right?
Right.
And it's like, I guess the business people are second class. I guess we just make money and support the people doing that. So I think it took me a decade and professionally to kind of clue into this idea that, like, no, we're all in ministry. And I like that term, that work and your business is a high calling. I like that. And I don't know that there's a hierarchy. I don't think there are. I think we're all called. We all have a high calling, whether we work for a church or a mission organization or a business. Or even if you're sweeping the floor, that's still a high calling.
Exactly. From a welder out on the shop floor,
Exactly.
that can be a high calling. And we all have ministry to do. Those of us that know the Lord, we've got ministry to do around us, no matter where He puts us.
And so to create an environment in your business where everyone feels like their job is a high calling and your high calling is to help them think that way, is that a fair way of characterizing the way you sort of think?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good way to put it.
Well, I just love that, man. I love the focus on people that your dad had and that you're continuing. And I think it's really valuable. And, Mike, as we wrap up, we always try to ask the same question, which is, there's this big arc of your career, and, you're still in there fighting the battle. I kind of like that it's fun to have you at this stage. You're not 70 years old looking back, telling all this. So you're in the middle of the career, really. But there are people, there's somebody on this that's at 10 years behind you, maybe they're working in the family business and they're not sure where this is all going to go, but maybe they're having some success and they can see some kind of arc in front of them, what advice would you give somebody who's maybe a decade behind you in a family business, and they're trying to kind of figure out how this all fits with kind of their calling and giving back? What would be just a practical tip that you might give them that they could think about tonight or tomorrow?
Yeah, I would say get to know the people at the level that you're at. And I haven't always done a good job of that. I'm preaching to myself here too. Um, to not rush that process, because I know I felt that way. Like, man, I need to fulfill whatever role, everybody thinks I should have as the second generation of this organization.
I got to run the whole thing now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that was pressure I was putting on myself,
Yeah.
not pressure that other people were putting on me. And so just to kind of embrace where you're at, and invest in the people around you, because those people are going to then remember that if and when you are, at another level in the organization. I think is real important.
So are you talking about learning from other people that maybe have the job ahead of you, and taking care of the people, kind of the rank and file, or just embracing the job you have, or kind of all the above?
Yeah, certainly all the above.
Yeah.
I think back to when I was working out in the field. So, that's probably the most blue collar of the work that we do. And just a cool group of guys, at various ages, various skill levels, various mentalities about life. A lot of people who had thought about the world very differently than I did. And it could be uncomfortable, uh, but yet it was really important to connect at that time, to connect with those people. And I remember, early on, one of the guys was like, man, I'd work for you in this organization. And here I am out there, like my sleeves rolled up next to him. Now I don't want to come off the wrong way. I've spent most of my career sitting in an air conditioned office while, most of our frontline workforce is out working in the heat and working in the cold. But to have that little bit of time where I was out there doing it with them, at that level. In fact, there was a long time in my career, where I felt like, man, maybe I need to go back out, and be a welder in order to lead this organization the way that it deserves to be led. Maybe I need to go back out and learn how to do, some of the other positions at the front lines level of the organization. And I kind of got over that. I did some of those things at varying degrees, but I don't think you need to learn everything. You don't need to learn how to do every position in the organization, but you do need to show the people that you're working with that you care about them, not just that you care about the organization or that you care about getting to a certain level in the organization.
Oh man, it's back to the people again.
Yeah.
More important, I mean, I wrote down a bunch of stuff from that, but more important I like this idea of embracing your current situation, not being in a hurry, not putting the pressure on yourself to take on more, and then absorbing how to learn the business, and more importantly, learning from the people and building relationships that'll pay off long term. So I like that pacing, this idea of pacing, which I could totally understand would not be the default. It's like, I got to hurry up and learn it all and then run the whole thing.
Yeah.
And maybe rushing the process.
And I've messed it up for sure. Recently I had a guy that left, and he felt jaded in leaving, that we weren't valuing him. And in hindsight, I learned a lot from that, because I'm like, man, I can understand how he felt that way. It wasn't really how I felt. But it was a failure of leadership on my part to understand, where he was at in what he was giving to the organization, and not necessarily, making him feel valued for that.
Well, listen, Mike, I know I've learned something today in having this conversation with you, and I know a lot of people listening to this have learned the same thing. So Thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
And absolutely enjoyed it. It was great to get to know you a little bit and love your podcast. Appreciate it.
All right. And thanks, everybody, for joining us on this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Check out our YouTube channel, our website, and share it with a friend. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.